When you are driving completely exhausted at 1 in the morning, highway hypnosis begins to take over your brain. The endless white lines blur together. The darkness feels heavy and suffocating. And any roadside motel looks like an absolute safe haven. You desperately want a bed, and in that state of mind, you stop caring about the flickering, broken neon signs or the desolate, sketchy parking lots. You just want to close your eyes, blindly into a trap waiting to snap shut. You ignore the peeling paint, the strange smells, and the eerie quiet. But maybe you should pay closer attention, especially when the strange front desk clerk hands you a plastic key card and casually mentions that the entire second floor of the building is completely empty. That detail might sound like a relief at first, but what it really means is that if you scream, no one is going to hear you. The muffled, aggressive sounds of a vicious, escalating argument started bleeding through the paper-thin drywall next door. It sounded exactly like a toxic couple in the middle of a serious fight. One voice was a deep, gravely and angry man's voice, while the other was a softer, higher-pitched woman's voice. It was incredibly annoying at first, threatening to ruin the driver's desperately needed rest. But as the driver sat up in bed and listened closer, their blood ran completely cold. The timing of the aggressive fight was way too perfect. In a real argument, people lose their tempers. They interrupt. They scream over each other in a chaotic mess of noise. But not this one. There was never a single second of overlap. The deep voice would speak. A perfect pause. Then the soft voice would respond. The realization hit the driver like a physical punch to the gut. The softer voice didn't sound like a real woman. It sounded like a grown man pitching his voice up, desperately trying to mimic a woman. It wasn't two people fighting. It was one single man sitting entirely alone in the dark next door, having a full, manic conversation with himself, practicing both voices. And right as that terrifying, stomach-churning realization settled in, the argument stopped dead. Complete, suffocating silence fell over the motel. Then, 3 slow, heavy knocks hit the wall right beside the driver's bed. It wasn't a bump. It was a deliberate, heavy fist knocking on the drywall, right where the driver's head was resting. "I hear you in there," a muffled, twisted, playful voice whispered through the wall. The driver held their breath, completely frozen in terror. The man knocked again, repeating the exact same phrase, waiting for an answer. Panicking, the driver grabbed the remote and cranked the television volume up to drown out the madness. But then, the heavy vibration of a door opening echoed loudly from the outdoor balcony. The man had left his room. Slow, deliberate, heavy footsteps started walking across the concrete walkway, heading straight for the driver's door. The driver crept off the bed, holding their breath, and slowly approached the window. The blinds were shut tight, but there was a tiny, fraction of an inch gap near the edge. Curiosity and pure fear took over. The driver peeled back the blind just a hair to peek outside. A man's face was pressed completely flat against the exterior window glass. His eyes were wide open, unblinking, and staring directly back into the darkened room. They made dead eye contact. Knowing he'd been spotted, the strange man didn't run away. Instead, he began violently pounding on the motel room door. As he hit the wood, he began frantically and psychotically switching his voice. The clerk rushed upstairs and, realizing the severity of the situation, relocated the driver to a downstairs room near the front office. Once locked inside, the driver finally felt a wave of relief. They thought they were safe. But hours later, in the dead of the night, long before the sun came up, a dark shadow quickly crossed the gap in the new window blinds. The driver froze, terrified to move, and carefully peeked out through the crack. It was the exact same man. He had found the new room. There were no more weird voices. There was no more violent knocking on the wood. He was just silently pacing back and forth in the dark, staring directly at the door, waiting patiently for them to come out. The driver didn't sleep another second, packing their bags and fleeing the absolute second the morning sun broke the horizon. While they were standing at the front desk waiting for their room keys, the grandmother called the sister's cell phone to ask what room number they were put in so she could change her clothes. The sister answered and read their exact room number clearly and loudly into the quiet lobby. Hours later, the girls came back to the motel after grabbing late-night pizza. The lobby was now completely pitch black in the back corner where the lounge televisions were located. But sitting entirely alone in the unlit darkness, doing absolutely nothing, was that exact same man in the black sweater. When the grandmother called the girl's phone again, the room number was accidentally mentioned out loud a second time. The moment the words left the sister's mouth, the man in the dark moved. He immediately pulled his cell phone from his pocket and started furiously whispering to someone on the other end of the line. The trap had officially been set and the targets had just confirmed their location. The girls went upstairs to the second floor. The family was split into 2 separate rooms, but they weren't directly next to each other. There was one single vacant room separating their door. For 20 minutes, everything seemed fine as they unpacked and got ready for bed. Then, a frantic, desperate knock hit the door. The girls opened it to find their stepmom rushing through the frame, pale, trembling, and terrified. She locked the deadbolt behind her and told everyone to pack their bags immediately. They couldn't stay. They needed to run, right now. She explained that she had briefly opened her own door just to set a bag of trash in the hallway, only to find a strange man standing in the dead quiet, pressed completely flat against the exterior wall right beside her room. He didn't speak. He didn't flinch. He just stared through her with dead eyes. Then, he calmly turned around, pulled out a physical room key, and walked into the dark, vacant room located right between the family's 2 rooms. They were completely surrounded. But instead of looking startled, he spoke in a whisper so unnaturally soft and calm that it made the hairs on the back of the boyfriend's neck stand straight up. "I'm just staying upstairs, going for a stroll." The strange man whispered into the dark. Refusing to engage, the boyfriend forced a polite nod, rushed inside the room, slammed the heavy wooden door shut, and aggressively locked the deadbolt. Julie was already fast asleep in the bed, completely unaware of the threat outside. But the boyfriend was paralyzed by a terrible sinking gut feeling. He couldn't hear footsteps walking away. Desperate to know if the coast was clear, the boyfriend got down on his hands and knees, crawled silently across the dirty carpet, and peeked through a tiny gap in the window blinds. Suddenly, Julie let out a sharp gasp of pure terror and scrambled backward away from the glass, falling onto the bed. "Look across the parking lot," she choked out, her voice trembling. The boyfriend crawled back to the glass. Standing all the way across the expansive asphalt lot, illuminated only by a dim, flickering yellow street lamp, was the massive man in the trench coat. He was no longer looking at the door. His head was tilted slightly up, staring directly across the darkness at the exact tiny crack in their blinds. He knew exactly where they were watching him from, and he wanted them to know he could see them. The elderly owner looked at them, completely confused and visibly terrified by their story. She said she had absolutely no idea who that towering man in the coat was. And then she delivered the most chilling, horrifying realization of the entire trip. She looked at the couple, shook her head, and confirmed that they were the absolute only guests checked into the motel that entire night. Thanks for watching.